Welcome to the Christopher Peter Review, your source of common-sense commentary on salient current events. I truly believe that critical thinking is essential in our daily life beyond just the choices we make in our households, but with our economic decisions, financial choices, and political selections. Personally, I believe that people should make choices that benefit their interests, well-being, and future. Most importantly, the understanding of why to do what you intend to do helps reassure you that you are making the right choice. There is always a legitimate argument for one path or another or a host of other options, but making decisions based on facts, evidence, data, and the understanding of the personal consequences one way or another is important. There are too many people who make decisions and then want to project out the responsibility for the choices they make. A bit of work early on can save countless hours later. Let us continue with this special episode. I had a conversation with a die-hard loyal Democrat voter recently, within a couple days of this release. In this conversation, the person wanted to gloat because of their opinion that Kamala Harris was an inevitable winner of the 2024 presidential election. Of course, this was not supposed to be a political event, but I nonetheless decided why not have a debate. After listening to the rhetoric, the person spewed the expected talking points you would expect from your typical base voter and Democrat base voter, spewing the same Trump talking points that is emailed to them by the DNC, and the same Republican attacks that is also sent in emails by the party for talking points. The question that seemed to cause the person to divert or change direction each time always involved why or what. Why stay the course? What does Kamala offer? And did that make a case that she will be a better president than either Trump or Biden? The person could not answer that. He was just conditioned to hate Trump and hold assumptions for anyone that may support Trump or Republicans. When those assumptions proved not practical or real, the person did not know anything but to change the scope, a practice that is common with your typical base voter. Another interesting common practice I notice with many base voters is the false claim of objectivity or independent positioning, when the reality is that they are neither independent nor objective, nor have the real desire to do so. For instance, I hear many people with leftward-leaning views claiming to hear both sides. In this debate, the person claimed to watch Fox News and CNN and was kind of thrown off by the idea that all news is propaganda, because many voters will claim to hear both sides, but will listen to the news of their choices to bolster their opinion and talking points, and hear enough of the news that has a bias against their preferred to fuel their anger against those who oppose their views. A true objective person is able to understand what each candidate in any contest offers, what their policies may lead to both positive and negative, and determine why they should choose one or the other. There are always reasons to vote for either side, but the one that usually aligns better with your interests should get your vote. But base voters tend to shift their interests to match their personal perceived need to fit with the party they align with. There is nothing wrong with being a Republican or Democrat. There is something wrong with not knowing why you support either side or being unwilling to see the negative side. Base voter mentality can blind you. Let us move the discussion towards the need for critical thinking in our politics, and seeing beyond the base voter mentality that traps so many people, many of whom should truly know better. Be a free thinker in the sense of separating constructs and defaults to seeing what should be the right path based on facts, evidence, and data. There was once a time when American society embraced a level of responsible free thinking, where people were encouraged to be open-minded to new ideas while still being principled at the same time. A time when there was not a manufacturing of fears around every idea nor every tradition. Even the most conservative person understood that they should at least understand something different, and have reasons why the status quo is more suitable than the proposed change. And the most progressive person understood that new ideas must be rooted in the conceptual reality to the present and draw from tradition. This allowed for responsible discourse where ideas could be debated in a reasonable and rationed manner. Those protecting society through holding us accountable to our values and principles would be able to raise concerns that must be addressed to protect our culture and way of life. Those proposing new ideas must be held to account to ensure that the drawbacks are addressed and mitigated. People were not scared of learning about new ideas. Many people looked at ideas and evaluated them in their own way, coming out on one side or another for reasons that stem from their needs, wants, backgrounds, and demographical leanings. You may disagree, but many times there are valid arguments being exchanged. These individuals knew the why. Why did they support something? Why did they oppose something? Over time, we have lost the understanding of the why because many people are too afraid to ask why, and many people are too afraid to be asked why. So this changes our national discourse, because there becomes a lack of critical thinking that goes into the important decisions that we make as a society. In the podcast episode, Political Stakes, I talked about how there are certain societal political dogmas that exist to keep people from hearing opposing views. A curation of our society, if you will. For instance, there is a stigma for people who listen to talk radio. But when you actually take a moment and listen to a show, it is nothing like they make you believe it to be. Like the discussions you hear on televised news talk radio discusses current events, but the format allows for longer, less interrupted discussions as well as engagement with audience members that allow for exchange of ideas and opinions. Although calls are screened, the content allows you to hear arguments in a manner not so different from what you see on television, but hear from everyday people who either agree or disagree with the positions raised. On televised news talk, the host or pundit is able to talk at the audience, interrupted only by commercial breaks, in a similar manner like a pastor speaks to a congregation that knows they are there to listen and pass the basket. But still, the discussions are centered around the current events of the day. Now, I am not oblivious to the political biases that people are trying to prevent others from listening to news. There is a stereotype that talk news is conservative while televised news is liberal, but the reality is many stations have both voices on their networks. When I stopped listening to the naysayers and listened to some talk radio, I noticed that there were some conservative shows I like to hear from, as well as some liberal hosts that provided some poignant points of view. There are some liberal shows that raise reasonable points that provide opportunities for a compromise and negation, and vice versa. Now, televised news has conservative voices as well as progressive liberal voices. In both platforms, conservative voices will always do better, because people tend to lean conservative or center-right. America is a center-right society, despite what some pundits want you to believe. So conservative voices will always have a more loyal audience, simply because more people consider themselves conservative even if they vote Democrat. Ironically, the current environment is shifting from televised news to podcasts or YouTube, which is still showing similar trends but still has a wide variety of opinions, even more so than with the television platforms. A fair counterpoint is that with the move towards social media, there is a risk of people spewing disinformation or misinformation. But there is a risk in current platforms as well as false information is provided on televised or radio news each day. The naysayers promoting televised news were probably simply protecting their viability on their current platform. If people listen to their news, maybe they would not be in the market for watching news. That same sentiment is being used, but this time it is targeting podcasts and social media-based publications. The same naysayers are trying to discredit non-traditional sources to protect their own economic interests. So why should you experience news or current events through social media, televisions, newspapers, or radio? People should experience news content in the manner of their choosing and convenience, but also be aware that the source may have biases and propaganda that may be aimed at purposefully influencing your behaviors. The platforms are not the risk, the individuals are. Tying back to my earlier story, there is a level of propaganda in all news, which may make certain platforms harder to detect when you consider the entertainment aspect and ability to see the themes clearly. As I said before, you should expose yourself to differing views and differing platforms to be able to see the truth easier. The same repetitive voices can lower your guard on either side. It is important to know why you are making a choice, and understand if it is the best choice you can make at that moment, and for your individual needs. Not the needs of people that have no vested interests in your outcomes, but the people that are exposed to the consequences for the decision and choices. Part of the reason why critical thinking in our political decisions, economic choices, and daily leanings is harder even with more information available, is because there are social constructs that are maintained to prevent people from questioning the preferred choices in these societal fears. For instance, many times you may choose certain types of music, movies, or food because to fit into certain ecosystems. Or you choose tech products because you want to be associated with the Apple crowd or the Samsung environment. You are not really encouraged to question these choices until there is negativity associated with the preferred choice. Otherwise, you are cajoled to remaining in these base camps because you do not want to be left out, or you do not want to do something different or that could be perceived as harmful to someone that looks like you, but does not bear the individual consequences of the collective coerced decision. Before you make any decision to buy a product, select a candidate to vote for, accept a job offer, or experience a source of media, I challenge you to question whether it is the right decision for you. Maybe it truly is, but at least you know why you are doing what you intend to do, not just going along to get along with people that have no interest in your personal outcomes. Now let us critically think about the important decision ahead of us, or whether the best decisions are being made in this campaign. Political campaigns involve a great level of mudslinging, insults, and fabrications. Both Republicans and Democrats are guilty of this. Anti-Trumpers cast the former president as the reincarnation of Hitler. Anti-Harris people point out her mental mistakes and perceptions drawn from that. That is the nature of politics, but not how the election will be won. Democrats want to make it appear like they do not take part in the mudslinging, but they are being dishonest. There is a great deal of projecting onto others what is true about themselves, and deflecting responsibility for their actions. That is at the core of the average everyday progressive. How many times have they called Trump deranged, fat, weird, and hurled insults at his supporters? Trump has been guilty of the same reckless behaviors, calling Harris dumb rather than highlighting the clear evidence of her incompetence. In reality, Trump does not need to go low to defeat Harris because the reality is her record, positions, and judgment are disqualifying to most rational people. Trump would be better off highlighting her radical positions, statements, and actions that are clear as day. And her bad judgment was made clear as day with her selection of Tim Walz as her running mate. In 2020, Democrat voters saw Kamala Harris for who she truly is. They felt she was far too radical for a person seeking to become the President of the United States. Before any votes were cast in a primary contest of only Democratic voters, she had to step aside because there was no path forward. Voters simply were not willing to embrace a person who was ill-prepared and fringeworthy as she was. What has changed since then? Not much for the better if you really paid attention. Kamala Harris served as the vice president during one of the most critically poor performances of any presidential administration. The economy struggled. Communities deteriorated due to violence. Our borders were a mess, and the world went to war. Harris played a role in all this chaos and calamity. She might not have had the border czar title, but she was in charge of finding a strategy to solve the border crisis early on and completely missed the goalpost. Not even close. There is really no reason to call her dumb. Rather, show her record that is free of any sliver of success. Her complaints about not being trusted with big assignments because of her performance on the one she actually was tasked to do. Point out her flawed judgment where she bailed out rioters and continues to support fringe organizations. Does a smart person with sound judgment put criminals back on the street simply due to emotional hysteria over an injustice? Does a smart person answer one injustice with even more injustice? Now, we are supposed to believe she is any different than the failed candidate who is inarticulate when trying to deliver any message to the public. In the heat of the Biden coup, Jen Psaki tried to convince viewers she is a much different candidate than what they previously saw. To some degree, she is given that she would have a stronger support staff if she were the nominee versus simply competing for the nomination. The scripted reality that is a national political convention will try to make the radical seem like the norm, especially when dealing with the radical left that is disconnected with the average American voter. The repackaging of failed Soviet economic principles will not lead America to where we need to be, but will continue to the same negligent decline caused by progressives at all levels of government. Trump does not have to even talk about her use of cultural identity for her self-serving political benefit, when there is a clear economic identity of her being clearly economically illiterate. Consider her call for price caps, reminiscent of the Soviet use of price controls that greatly aided their economic collapse and defeat in the Cold War. Kamala Harris fundamentally does not understand how inflation works and what is needed to solve the problem. Listen to her actual statements on the subject and she is clearly out of her league, as most progressive are. And we should not be surprised why Biden and Harris completely failed in this regard. She wants to solve the housing problem by creating more government projects, which will just continue to fuel the problem because it will not be done the right and proper way. Why blue states are struggling with housing issues is because the markets are suffering from imbalances, caused by progressive policies that caused inflationary conditions that made the need to raise interest rates, and at the same time many limited development of new housing and supportive environmental leanings. So the high cost and low supply drove housing costs up, trapped those who could afford houses in a normal market into apartments, blocking apartments for people who needed them in areas that had low vacancy rates. More inventory is needed, but government projects dubbed as affordable housing is not the answer. Restoring the balance in the market is needed, where people can get the housing they need in communities they are willing to live in, rather than erecting government projects that will be poorly maintained, and eventually becoming anchors to once promising communities. Trump should really highlight Kamala Harris's political identity, showing how progressives like Harris embrace radicals, which she clearly demonstrated with her selection for vice president. The clear and obvious choice was Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, but he is not the right religion for her taste and the progressive taste, who clearly hate Christians and Jews, or at the very least have little tolerance for them, but are surprisingly sympathetic for those who support a terrorist organization taking control of a non-nation and launching a horrific attack, and then experiencing the ramifications of the war they caused. Harris has maintained the slim margin and energized Democrats who are happy they have a functional candidate, but she is still not favored on the important issues. This is where Trump needs to run a disciplined campaign and really hammer the political and ideological differences between his agenda that has delivered in the past and hers that has harmed so many in the present. Based on ideas, Donald Trump is the better candidate, but he will not be able to show it if he obsesses with petulant attacks and distractions. He still has the advantage, but it is a closer race than many on his side hoped for. In closing, a big thank you to all of you in the audience. Your viewership is appreciated and valued. I encourage people regardless of any demographic, ideology, or any group to be better critical thinkers in life in general. That alone can help our society when people make the right decisions in their daily lives and reduce the external costs and consequences associated with those decisions, while retaining the personal benefits. Please further the Christopher Peter Review on social media, and continue to visit www.crcreview.com for new episodes. Thank you once again. Until next time.